your blood. By your blood, I'm covered by your blood, your precious blood, your holy blood. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. Was Saul supposed to do this? And wasn't it true that the Levites from the tribe of Levi, from the house of Aaron, were the ones who were uh, delegated the responsibility of sacrifice, atonement, and sacrifice? Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. What is he doing offering sacrifice? Or wasn't he supposed to wait for the man of God? Verse 22. But Samuel replied, Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. God rather you obeying him than sacrificing. Now, Saul was supposed to kill the king of the Amalekites, Agag. He was supposed to kill him, and he didn't do his job. So here in verse 32, we have the man of God, Samuel, would ensure that the commands of God were carried out. So here in verse 32 it is said, verse 32, Then Samuel said, Bring me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, Surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, As your sword has made woman childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before the Lord at Gilgal. He completed the assignment. Obedience better than sacrifice. So what does it mean to be Christian? Jesus declares that not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom, but those who do the will of my Father. Don't Christian get it? Or can't you see that when God said to Moses, speak to the rock, Moses struck the rock, and God said, Moses, I said speak, you struck. Because of this, Moses, you will not enter the promised land, but I will take care of you. Abraham obeyed God all the way through. And we all have weaknesses. But one thing that we must understand, according to the biblical God, you will not have your way. If you are going to be the people of God, if you're going to be the servant of God, you must obey his instructions. It is true all the way from the time of Adam and Eve. God said to Adam and Eve, it started there, do not eat from this tree. They ate from the tree, they died just like God said. And we have it all the way through, obedience and disobedience. Those who obey, they receive blessings and life from God. Those who obey, they receive blessings, life, justification from God, as in Abraham who obeyed. Adam and Eve disobeyed, they die. Abraham obeyed and he was justified as righteous. Abraham believed and obeyed and was justified by his obedience, by his faith and obedience. Samuel obeyed. Saul disobeyed. Follow the instructions of the Lord all the way through. And Jesus saying, now as a Christian, who is a Christian? What is a Christian? Jesus saying that the one who hears and obeys my instructions. Those would be my mother and my brothers. Not everyone who said, Lord, Lord, but those who do the will of the Father. Obedience. Jesus said, not my will, but your will be done. Obedience. So we are discussing here Christian. What does it mean to be Christian? To begin with, we have to understand that it is obedience to obey the instructions of Christ. Yet today we have great division along the line of traditions, customs, doctrine, declarations of faith. The Eastern Orthodox proclaim aversion to the Christian faith, and you have various branches in Eastern Orthodox, but they are close to being the same. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Latvian Orthodox. Then we have the Western branch to Christendom, the Catholic Church. We have a split in the church. We have Martin Luther declaring to the church in his trial, where he stated that I cannot and will not recant because it's not safe. I will not go against conscience. I will not go against God or conscience. So I will not obey the Pope or any one unless it is clear in scriptures and my conscience co-signs. So it is not true, it is not just, it is not right, it is not Christian just because the Pope says it. It is not Christian just because your pastor says it. It's not Christian. It's not Christian just because it is a part of the Church of God, because it's a part of charismatic Pentecostalism, because it's a part of the Lutheran Church. It's not Christian because it is a part of the Catholic branch, because it's a part of the Eastern branch. It is Christian because what? It is Christian because it came from Christ. So before you even begin to examine Christian, you must understand the basis of Christian. It is the teachings of Jesus Christ that you must have and obey. So the first thing then, when we look at Christian, what is Christian? Before we get into more details, what is Christian? The first is that Christian, to be Christian. To be Christian means obeying Christ and living by his commands and example. Obeying Christ and living by his commands and example is what it means to be Christian. Obeying Christ and living by his commands and example. Obeying Christ and living by his commands and example is what it means to be Christian. And how might we find the commands or teachings and example of Jesus? We find it in the teaching of the apostles, or we find it in the early church. Said another way, we find it in the teachings of the apostles, the disciples, or the Greek ekapostolo, meaning sent out, the ones who Jesus sent out, like the king calling one and making you an ambassador. So you have an ambassador going from one country to the next, and you're representing the king, the queen. You're representing this leader. When Jesus sent the apostles out, they were his ambassadors. They were not speaking on their own, they were speaking on the behalf of Christ. They were taking the teachings, the example of Christ. The example meaning this is how Jesus lived. This was his life. Look at his life. Examine his life. His life is your example. And his teaching and commands, here are the things that he left for us, that he commanded us. And both the commands and example of Jesus we find in the records of apostolic ministry. That is, the apostles who witnessed the life of Jesus. The apostles who tell us Jesus went here, Jesus did this,